Thank you very much, Peter, and also to the HITS Institute for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here again. I think I've been here several times, for example, in the context of the Journalist in Residence program or the Klartext Award jury meetings, for example. And also we invited some members of HITS to our conferences. Kai is here, so thanks again for that, for coming to Hamburg. As discussed in a smaller context before, it came to mind to me that I really did not put AI or artificial intelligence onto the first slide and not into my title, which is, I think it's better that way, like to speak of learning systems in a broader sense. And this includes, as I've learned, you had another AI meeting earlier today where AI may not have been, I would say, closely narrowed down or maybe not really defined that way. I would say learning systems are all the systems that do machine learning, including deep learning, of course, including LLMs, but also machine learning systems that work with analytical data, for example, or other huge data sets. So more like a broader sense. And we will look at some broader application fields in journalism, of course, today as well. I'd like to invite you to join me on a journey into the research area of journalism and communication in the times of learning algorithms or AI. And I would say the subtitle really represents my own current view quite well. I think they are both a challenge and also a transformative force that is already there and that we have to deal with. But of course, we need to do it in a meaningful way, especially as journalists who have like a more normative approach as well to their own work, because they are not only economically driven, but also driven by their own values and by their normative goals to serve the society as a whole and also to serve individuals in a meaningful way. I'd like to start with 3 magazine front pages that I really like a lot because they show us the broad, the sphere and also the problem sphere of journalism and AI. The first one is a magazine front page of Der Spiegel, The End of Truth, and some even call it epistemic apocalypse, sorry. Like a challenge for verification efforts in general, when it comes to journalism, it's more verification. But we all, of course, have the challenge to distinguish between real and artificially generated pictures and videos. Sometimes, of course, we still have clues like hands or the frames that are not that well driven or generated in most cases, but this is one topic that really keeps journalists thinking quite a lot, what they of course have to learn to distinguish between real and fake sources, for example. Then we also have the field of product development, and also AI as maybe even a superpower to, for example, include diverse perspectives into product development processes and foster innovation, for example, by supporting prototyping or testing efforts and representing target groups, for example. I will come back to that later on. And then we have the third one from New Yorker, which I like quite a lot because this is the everyday challenge to collaborate with AI-driven systems where you have high expectations and they are then afterwards confronted with systems being trained on and designed to solve specific problems, not necessarily being identical with those you want to solve. And also, of course, journalism is overall then challenged in various ways, like on a working or at a working level in terms of core competencies and regarding the further development of workflows, processes, services, and products. If we zoom back a little bit, for media houses, I would say 2025 is a year in the midst of a huge transformation, resulting in 2 main challenges or missions, if you like. First, journalism has to co-design and integrate AI systems in a way that is actually helpful, because they can do quite a lot for journalism. And it's important to realize the enormous potential that AI has. For example, when it comes to the transformation of different communications formats into one another, meaning not only text to speech and speech to text, but also maybe video to article and article to podcast, stuff like that. Then secondly, journalists also have to fulfill their role and mission in society, provide orientation, identify problems and current developments. And this is also one development they have to look at. So they have to conduct algorithmic accountability reporting and try to investigate if we as a society really profit from the AI transformation, especially looking at minorities, for example, not being well represented in AI's training data. Unfortunately, one temptation displayed on the right side that is still quite often given into is the anthropomorphism. I'm so sorry. I knew that I wouldn't make it. Anthropomorphization of AI in both visual and textual form, represented, for example, by humanoid robots. Of course, this can also be observed in many other fields of communication, and is surely not helping anybody understanding the many variations and types of learning algorithms whose learning capacity and process is so very different from ours as human beings. So obviously we can name what is not so helpful, but how do we find out what solution is the right one for the current situation? Of course, this is not an easy task due to the complex and dynamic nature of the current AI transformation. Using the Cynefin framework that crossed my way when I was trained to become a systemic process consultant, we can distinguish between 4 types of problems. We have the easy ones, like a flat tire, for example, that you can really quite easily fix. Then we have complicated ones, like the task to build a robot or a rocket, for example. Chaotic ones like a forest fire, and complex issues like those dynamic and living ecosystems in nature, for example, where you cannot really predict reactions by simply observing. You have to gather experiences, you have to test them again and again to really gather knowledge about the system. This is also the case for the current AI transformation, I would argue, where we are dealing with a very dynamic and complex interplay of technical developments on the one side, and also individual observations and perceptions and needs and problems, for example, with many stakeholders involved, some of them even influencing global politics. So this is why I would not suggest any kind of clear one strategy at the moment, but of course we can look at some case studies, general trends, and common overarching challenges and recommendation. So, keeping the octopus, and I will start to show you some current AI applications or application fields in media houses, just to give you an overview about the many different and diverse applications. So we start with this overview, and this is just the journalistic value chain divided into 4 parts: the knowledge management, research, including investigations, the production part, and also distribution parts. And in all of these parts, we have different AI-driven systems, algorithms that are used within workflows, mainly in the form of assistance, of course, right now, or in supporting decisions separate from the content level, because this is always an important and interesting division. Like on the one hand, you have the content level where you, of course, shouldn't try to not at any means do any mistakes, because that is bad for trust, for all those normative values that journalists really want to follow and want to put into their work. And on the other hand side, you have the media houses with all their different and other departments away from the content level, and they can, of course, do much more of an experimentation. First of all, the knowledge management. I think this is one application field with huge potential. The reason is, of course, in journalism, in every investigation that you do, you gather knowledge, you collect knowledge, but just in a very few cases, this is really linked with the documents, data sets, and interviews of other investigations. So afterwards, you produce your journalistic piece, you publish it, and often without really using all these information that you gathered as knowledge resources ever again. And I think this is really so pitiful in the end. There's so much to be done here to raise those treasures because it's not interlinked. Everyone has it like on their laptops, on their computers. There's not a common archive. And even when it's published, really not that many media houses have digitalized archives. One early use case is the one above, where we have the public broadcaster WDR with its archive that has been digitized. I worked there as well 20 years ago without this archive, and I can tell you this saves much time because in former days you had to like just look at all those films and all those contents just to find out which parts of that you want to use again in your new piece, for example. And now you can search the archive. They did some speech to text, of course, but also entity recognition. You have like persons that could be identified. So you can really search by scene, by quotations, for example, and you can really use all the content that has already been produced much better. Another use case, which is shown here below, is or has been published a few weeks ago. And this is especially interesting for me because it's DPA, also a former employer of mine. And together with you.com, they built a RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation AI system based on DPA's archive. So now you can use a chatbot to search the archive, and it really gives you back answers that are also cited. So you can then really look at the concrete sources and contexts, and also really make sure that you don't work with hallucinations that you get back from the LLM. The second field is, of course, also positively influenced by better archives, but not only that. Here we have in the research field and investigations, we have many data-based investigations, for example, that really use AI algorithms quite a lot these days, or where they are quite well established and who profit from them quite a lot. One very early example, again, is BuzzFeed spy planes, which has been a project from, I think, 7 years ago, or almost 8 years ago, where they used flight transponder data, like you have them on Flightradar 24, for example. They had like 100 surveillance flight data sets, and then they trained the algorithm to find those surveillance flight traces or patterns in a huge transponder data set. So I think they used Flightradar 24 to find really many spy planes. And this has led to some really relevant disclosures as well. For example, flights in the Mexican airspace, which is not that well done from a US governmental entity. Then we have Neo4j, which is an AI-driven tool that helps to analyze data leaks, like those of Pandora Papers, Panama Papers, and so on and so forth. So you can then extract some entities, like persons and companies, out of this huge data set that you have being composed of emails, spreadsheets, documents, some really weird formats and stuff like that. So it's not possible to really find a good strategy to search this data set from the beginning, but together with such a system, you can like find important nodes in the network and start with them, for example. And on the bottom slide, you see one typical example of Bayerischer Rundfunk, of their data team. And they used satellite data to find out heat islands in cities to make the case that it's really important to design and to prevent those heat islands in summer when it's really also a health risk. to have them or to live in those areas, and to bring together those huge satellite data sets, they also had to use AI algorithms. Then we have the field of production, which is in fact really one of those like low-hanging fruits, or where we find some of those low-hanging fruits regarding AI in journalism, because in the steps of the transcription, for example, of an interview that you have done, or the translation of pieces and of sources that come in other languages, it's really, really just helpful to have like systems that support you, and sometimes really crucial to save time, for example. This, of course, also goes beyond those easy tasks. For example, we have the BBC audiogram project that represents the transforming task, which means that we have like one format and want to transform it into another format. For example, the audio interview that we see right there into a social media posting that also works quite well to represent this kind of content. So, and yeah, overall, I would say all the other applications that we have right there, like bias detection and optimizations, are also the things that some newsrooms already do. They use AI systems to analyze their reporting regarding the representation, for example, of different genders and other common biases, just to find out more about themselves and their coverage. And then, as I told you earlier, we have this like distribution field where, for example, media houses have a bit more freedom to experiment with AI systems compared to the content editors, for example. So one prominent and well-established example in this field is the dynamic paywall. So most of the journalistic outlets who have paywalls right now are using dynamic paywalls just to display them in a moment where you really maybe even want to do and to really make this subscription in the end. And these are just a few graphics from the New York Times article about that. That's taking into account engagement rates and conversion rates. And another example is, for example, churn prevention, meaning the prevention of subscription canceling or cancellations by identifying subscribers who will potentially cancel their subscription tomorrow, at least according to their behavior. And then the media house, of course, can offer special extension options and discounts. And of course, such an experiment can just lead to or will be like effectful and will be a success in any case, because if you hinder two people from canceling their subscription, this is always a good thing. So there are many experiments in this field, also in the analytics field. So the results of this is that we have publishing divisions in many media houses with or who are now much more experienced with handling AI systems and collaborating with them compared to the editorial staff, who for quite a long time saw generative AI systems as mainly hallucinating and therefore useless, I would say. I brought one case study that combines several application fields of AI in journalism, and this is Remix Regional, again by Bayerischer Rundfunk, the German public broadcaster based in Munich. And the underlying challenge that they wanted to solve is that in their radio news program, they have regional windows, meaning that everyone gets the nationwide, the most important news first, and afterwards you get your regional news, depending on the Bavarian government district you are living in. And this infographic on the right upper side shows that, maybe for a person that lives in a region where some governmental districts are near, it's not the best best field to really bring in news. The central user need that they wanted to approach is that the shapes of the governmental districts are not necessarily identical with your personal interest or your home regions. that you individually perceive. And the solution is a news app where you can tailor your home region on a map yourself individually, and afterwards the radio news are customized and only the items are included that fit to your home region again. So AI here in this case is needed and used to split up the news program into single items, to geolocalize them, attach further metadata, for example, select fitting items within the personalization, and then also arrange them all in a meaningful order. The strategy behind that is thus a combination of like a modularization of journalism and personalization, meaning the separation of journalistic formats into modules that then can be combined and disseminated in a way that serves individual needs and interests maybe a bit better. And personalization must and should not necessarily mean, I just want to stress that people get the news they like, not the news they need to know. Those can be, of course, prioritized, but personalization offers offering many opportunities to consider, for example, like the bandwidth, the device and the platforms, the individual usage situation overall, a perfect field of application for AI systems, which are getting better and better in transforming formats into one another. Also, besides regional factors like remix regional, the personalization can take prior knowledge into account, for example, and personal interests in areas that are not that relevant. For example, I would say coverage of sports, for example, or celebrities. There may be an individualization of news content makes perfectly sense. Prior knowledge and language skills, also really, really important topics to enable larger target groups to access quality journalism, specifically including, for example, younger audiences or non-native speakers. Really important field, of course, for journalism outlets these days. And of course, being a very convincing use case on the one hand side, Remix Regional also points to some really relevant challenges related to AI use and AI-driven personalization. First of all, the infrastructure. Many media houses really need new ways to store their content with like granular metadata on the one hand side and extensive databases full of all the single modules to be combined later. It's not done that way right now. Then we have the storytelling aspects, like the composition of a journalistic piece, of course, matters a lot, quite a lot. And even news programs need a good mixture of topics and a flow of single items. So modular narrative styles have to be developed, and we, of course, have to teach them. So it's a nice challenge. And the third one is interesting and really German specific. These are the legal regulations for public service media in Germany, who are quite tight to protect other publishing houses from them as market competitors, for example. So, for example, every published content needs to a clear reference to the linear program, and a comprehensive local coverage is not allowed for them. And then something like Remix Regional suddenly becomes really interesting and complex case. So it's a really paradox situation that especially public service media houses right now are facing. Some of them have really strong AI and data journalism departments, but are currently not able to realize the full potential of those systems. Then we, of course, also have, next to the concrete obstacles, we have like general challenges to be mastered. And I would like to start, this has been here also before I learned about your training and course today, this morning. This is about labeling and trust. And of course, the question how to communicate and explain different stages of AI use in meaningful ways in the end. So we have different levels of AI influence, of course, in journalism. So if AI tools are, for example, optimized, used to optimize or to generate images, for example, this makes it difficult to find fitting and differentiated ways of communicating this specific influence, for example. Transparency on the one side, of course, I would say is an honorable goal. But yeah, we need some more and differentiated ways of communicating instruments, going beyond labels like the one that TikTok has deployed, for example, which is really hard to recognize. Do you see it? It's right there. It says AI generated. So it's also really a broad like label that can really mean anything and nothing in the end. Consulting the literature, we find a quite strong evidence for transparency. Maybe you all know that already and have read those papers as a factor that positively influences trust building in AI technology next to explainability, algorithmic fairness, for example, and data security. Trust, on the other hand, seems to be a meaningful goal to follow, since it's proven to lead to better decisions, acceptance, and a better user experience in the in the usage of AI tools in the end. And on the right side, I included one nice example that has been developed, I think 5 or 6 years ago by the Bergman Klein Center in Cambridge, called the data nutrition label. So this builds on the FDA's nutrition label for food, and it just wants to give you and highlight the key ingredients in a data set in addition to qualitative information that describes the data set and its composition. And I think this is really a nice approach to use something that people already have to deal with in a daily life, and then just try to include to include some information and the most relevant things they need to know as users of, for example, data sets. On the other side, we also see evidence for deterrence effects of transparency, I would say. So Toff and Simon, for example, described the paradox of AI disclosure, meaning that users want to know whether AI was used, but at the same time, they lose trust in the content when they know about this AI usage. And one related effect might be the label, or that labels and warnings are found to serve as instructive tips that help to develop critical thinking, which then, of course, also includes the journalistic content and the ways in which it has been investigated and produced. So we see, for example, quite often right now, the recommendation to carefully label AI usage in journalism, especially when the audience already has a low confidence in journalism on the one hand side, or limited knowledge about AI use. And I think the latter is maybe just relevant for every application field, because, I mean, who has a really good knowledge about AI use in any kind of application field? We wanted to test those recommendations in focus group discussions in last November in cooperation with the Rheinische Post, who offers really a nice use case. They do AI-generated audio versions of their articles with synthesized voices of the authors of those articles. So, for example, we have this opinion piece by Martin Kessler, a renowned journalist at Rheinische Post, who provided his voice to train a generative AI system, a voice algorithm that can now read aloud his and only his articles. So we discussed this use case and more general questions together with 3 groups of readers of the Rheinische Post in November, and we found basically just a lot of interesting arguments, but basically 2 things. First thing is that people expected journalists and also people in other branches to extensively use AI systems right now, and really widely, and have the impression that it's really hard to recognize it in any case. So this was like the expectation. There is AI everywhere and we just don't really see it. And then they wanted to have some standardized labels. Everyone like mentioned the stop signal, which is internationally like usable and understandable. So something like that would be great, of course. So one label to communicate AI usage, but only in those cases where it's really relevant, like where the content of a journalistic piece has been composed by the AI system, not in a case where only you have optimized your pictures, for example, with the help of AI. And this differentiation, I think, is really interesting. Like users don't want to have an AI label everywhere because this will be the case then if we want to do it everywhere where AI algorithms have been involved somehow. So they need like a specific label where the AI usage has really done something to the output in a meaningful and relevant way. Yeah, so we will have to make that transparent, obviously, and people really wanted to have like all the background information as well, and journalists could also produce them. If you zoom out a little bit and look at other application fields outside journalism, just to bring in some more studies, for example, and surveys, the results regarding AI perception are quite similar, I would say. When it comes to the creation of persuasive content, for example, people favored humans over AI systems, but perceived the AI-generated contents to be of higher quality in the end, not knowing who has really written them. And they also, in the end, showed no aversion regarding AI. In overall surveys, and this is like one example from the KPMG global survey, we see that Germans report higher knowledge in AI than people in other Western countries. But 2/3 were quite unwilling or unsure about trusting AI in general, whereas the acceptance is quite high compared to other countries. And I think 72% said they feel quite optimistic about AI, which can be also a starting point to really use that to go and foster competencies, for example. So uncertainty seems to be quite widespread, I would conclude. And if we remember the paradox of AI disclosure, this might be another argument for careful labeling approaches, for example, with integrated optional explanations. Just if you want to have them, you can get them, of course. The objective should, of course, always be to not jeopardize trust while living up to the editorial responsibility of delivering independent and quality assured journalism, and also communicating this to the audience that is served by that. The second general challenge concerns society as a whole, and especially everyone in charge of developing and training AI algorithms. And it's, of course, close to my heart as Algorithm Watch member to point this out. So how do we define which values should be taught to algorithms? For example, regarding fairness and diversity, there are various methods, of course, to include goals like fairness and diversity in machine learning. But this requires decisions, of course. So what does fairness, for example, mean for us? Which groups should be treated similarly? How do we operationalize that? And do we understand fairness in a group-related, for example, or in an individual way? And do we understand it as parity, as equal opportunities, for example, or equalized odds? So, of course, this may sound a bit unrealistic, but I think we need or would need to discuss those questions in society as a whole, to enable systems to work in a way we need them to work, and not like in this Midjourney example where you can see you can see pictures of an Indian person to display and reinforce stereotypes when asked how an Indian person like this, in this case, looks like. Just to tell you first, in case you wonder, this is like an Indonesian dish, who of course always are served on banana plants and look the same either way. So of course, I think alignment is just like one of varied ethical challenges we are facing. I would also, for journalists, of course, put other topics beside that. For example, it's especially important also to ensure, for example, the autonomy and independence of editorial units from their tech giants, for example, they are collaborating with, on whose tools they are using, for example, when it comes to privacy, to data protection issues. Also, media houses have to earn and secure their audience's trust and need to make sure that they distribute truthful information. and are creating transparency when it comes to the algorithms they use. I think this is often quite hard, for example, since training data sets are only partially disclosed, of course, or not disclosed at all for the common AI systems these days. Diversity, of course, is a huge topic for journalism, too, since minorities need representation in the public sphere and sometimes also strong advocates that also journalists can do or can be. Not least, AI systems should also be used in a way that increases the scope of decision. Decisions like the German Ethics Council has also stated in their piece on AI and fairness. For publishers, this decision-making ability is currently also, I would say, an important success factor in order to be able to adapt to the transformative aspects and nature of AI in digital ecosystems, of course. So AI systems that restrict media companies in this sense would be extremely counterproductive. Ethical requirements, of course, like the bias prevention topic is not only important for AI image generators like Midjourney, but also for large language models whose biases have been described by multiple studies. For example, this one found social biases in LLMs regarding diverse features, including age and shape, for example, religion, nationality, sexual orientation, as the main systematic reason they see. In particular, the selection of training data sets regarding languages, for example, domains and persons involved at the time period of their creation. So to me, I think the time period of their creation, this aspect is particularly noteworthy because with outdated training data, we don't just teach the system to make decisions as we know them from the recent past. No, they will also act like we think, or as we think we have long since overcome. And this should not be the way to proceed, I would say. To include more diverse perspectives and force LLMs to consider them in their answers, it has proven helpful to, for example, also include them already in the prompting. And this might work out quite well. This is what we also teach our students, like to just try to use the systems in a more meaningful way. For example, if they are doing research for an article on the rising energy prices, for example, they can use LLMs like ChatGPT as an advisor on the topics and questions to answer in their reporting to meet the information needs of specific audiences, like, for example, young parents or single parents who are heavily involved in managing their everyday life and who don't have the resources to shoulder the rising costs, for example. So on the right side, you see some answers and recommendations from ChatGPT with GPT-4 as a model who, for example, not to use exaggerations, not to use specialist language, to include, for example, concretely applicable and realistic tips. And for journalists who, of course, are also living in their own bubbles sometimes, such tips can be extremely useful as a start to provide really valuable content for specific target groups that they are not really involved with on a daily basis. And this is just one really nice graphic overview that I wanted to bring in. Maybe you know that already. It's just about the technical ways to increase fairness in machine learning, because I think it shows quite well that depending on the technical effort and the distributive fairness you want to achieve, and the technical effort you can put into these developments, you can really increase fairness. But of course, you need to know and to operationalize the kind of values in the background. And then the third challenge, the big one, is about the ecosystem. And it refers to the transformation of this digital ecosystem where AI systems and AI agents mediate more and more information. For example, this AI-generated search results as displayed in Google's Search Generative Experience, SGE, that is not rolled out in Europe right now, but maybe will be in the future. I don't know. And some countries already have it. This is really, for publishers, it's really leading to two quite important questions. The first one is how to make sure that journalistic content will be included in these research results by Google. So what kind of metadata do we have to attend, for example, and how to convince their audiences that's, yeah, really see those research results to still visit the websites of the journalistic outlets, because they find the most important information bits already in the search results, and it's also so nicely designed. So why should they visit then journalistic websites? One report that puts this topic into perspective is the AI in Journalism Futures report, and this is based on focus group discussions with AI experts from different fields around journalism, like media management, communication research, and journalism. And they identified 3 phases. So right now they say we are still in the efficiency phase, where AI systems are used to existing tasks and workflows to produce or accelerate well-known products. So of course, this is what you do in the first step. Then following the report, this phase will be followed by a transition phase where new processes and new products will emerge. And afterwards, a new AI-mediated ecosystem will be built or can be built with a different fundamental structure of the whole ecosystem. So to me, I think this perspective is quite helpful to shift the focus from the current efficiency tasks like automation, automated translation, and research assistance to a new kind of ecosystem that we don't know how it will look like, of course, and new kinds of media products. But of course, the question is, how will they need to look like? And for that, the authors of the AI and Journalism Future report see some general trends and identified 5 core scenarios for the future. So one trend is that we will have massively available information. It will all be personalized or even hyper-personalized. And we'll see even more misinformation and disinformation as we do today. Also, especially legacy media will be very challenged to reach their audiences, especially since AI agents and human machine interfaces will become even more important and need to be considered when producing and distributing content. Business models will thus be under pressure, of course, and need to be reinvented. And looking at the core scenarios on the right side, 2 seem to be most relevant for journalism. The first one is power flows to those who know your needs. So this emphasizes that it will become even more important to know what audiences or an individual level really want and need from journalism in concrete terms. And the next one, omniscience, for me, noise for you, points out to the fact that we won't all profit from this development equally. Of course, some groups will be able to use all those new AI-powered possibilities and maybe even become omniscient, and others may be left behind or be at least less involved. And journalism, of course, should take this into account and prevent it as far as possible, not at least because of the normative aspirations to serve society and individuals as well, and also minorities, of course. Yeah, and this is just another view on the public service media side, because they, of course, also need to find ways to transform themselves into this future. And this is a paper that I've also been involved with. And this pointed out that public service media could really deliver 3 new services in the future. The first one could also be data, gathering and delivering data, for example, archives and context data sets for retrieval augmented generation systems. Then access, providing access to the information that is really socially relevant for everyone, thus filtering the information overload that we are in and that we will all be in the future as well. And the third thing is listening, just to learn about and to really truly understand needs, desires, and values of the audiences and society as a whole. And this is a task, of course, that journalists should be able to do because they're quite well trained to listen to people. Yeah, to just sum it up, I would just advise journalism to do these 5 things. and most of them also being relevant, I would say, to communication in general and maybe to also other fields as well. First one is to foster the user centricity, of course, to critically monitor the AI transformation, build up expertise, and co-create the future together with partners and with corporations. Secure trust, also an important topic for me personally, I think for every branch these days, especially also for research and science, and also to start to prepare for future demands by developing meaningful ways of personalization. Because yeah, this will be needed and won't or is not really developed yet. And of course, to again show you this nice picture of the octopus, one last thing to reflect on, to accept and embrace the need of ambiguity of attitude in the end, because I think we all need to be both open and critical towards the AI transformation. Especially, we need to be keen to experiment, find out and shape where we want this transformation to develop. And this, of course, is a recommendation not only for journalists and communicators, but in fact for all of us. And yeah, I think this should then be also the end of this presentation. And I'm absolutely open to your questions and comments, and many thanks for the attention today. Thank you.